They kicked out 14-year-old River Hayes for writing that her mother was a Navy SEAL, but what happened next left an entire Montana town speechless. The expulsion hearing was meant to address River's, quote, delusional behavior, but Principal Ruth Garrison had no idea she was about to humiliate the daughter of Commander Patricia Blaze Hayes, one of America's most classified operators. As Dr. Sheffield diagnosed River with fantasy disorder and 200 townspeople gathered to witness her public shaming, Master Chief Michael Hayes sat quietly in the back row, checking his watch with military precision. Outside, black SUVs with government plates were already pulling into the parking lot, and 6 figures in naval combat uniforms were preparing to remind Willow Creek, Montana, that some truths are worth defending. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Willow Creek High School, with the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the teacher's lounge and the familiar squeak of sneakers on polished linoleum. River Hayes sat in her usual spot in the back corner of Mrs. Teresa Jimenez's advanced English class, her essay folded neatly on the desk beside her well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The assignment had been simple enough: write about a personal hero and explain their impact on your life. While her classmates had chosen celebrities, athletes, or historical figures, River had written about her mother. "River, would you like to share your essay with the class?" Mrs. Jimenez asked, her voice carrying the gentle encouragement that had made her River's favorite teacher over the past 2 years. River shook her head, dark hair falling across her face like a protective curtain. "It's kind of personal, Mrs. J." "The best writing often is," the teacher replied, moving between the desks with the grace of someone who had spent 15 years navigating teenagers and their complicated emotions. "Sometimes sharing our personal truths helps others find theirs." From 3 rows ahead, Aiden Garrison twisted in his seat, his smirk already forming before he spoke. "What's wrong, River? Afraid we'll find out your hero is imaginary like your mom's job?" The classroom fell silent. Even the perpetual hum of the ancient heating system seemed to pause. River's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on her desk. This wasn't the first time Aiden had made comments about her mother's absence. And it wouldn't be the last. Being the principal's son gave him a certain immunity to consequences that he wielded like a weapon. "That's enough, Aiden," Mrs. Jimenez said firmly, but the damage was already done. 28 pairs of eyes were now focused on River, waiting for her response. "My mother isn't imaginary," River said quietly, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. "She's deployed." "Right," Aiden continued, emboldened by the attention. "Deployed doing what exactly?" "Because my dad says there's no record of any Patricia Hayes in any branch of the military." Mrs. Jimenez opened her mouth to intervene, but River was already standing, her essay clutched in her hand. "Your dad doesn't know everything." "He knows enough to see through your family's lies," Aiden shot back, his voice rising. "Everyone knows your mom abandoned you. Why can't you just admit it instead of making up these crazy stories?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, toxic and suffocating. River felt the familiar burn behind her eyes that meant tears were coming. But she forced them back. Her grandfather had taught her that tears were a luxury warriors couldn't afford, especially not in front of an audience. "Aiden Garrison, report to the principal's office immediately," Mrs. Jimenez commanded, her usually warm voice now carrying an edge that could cut glass. "And take your attitude with you." But the seeds of doubt had already been planted. River could see it in the way her classmates exchanged glances, in the whispered conversations that would follow her through the hallways. The story of her mother, the woman she hadn't seen in 8 months but spoke to through coded messages and midnight phone calls, was about to become the town's favorite topic of speculation. After the final bell released them from the confines of academic obligation, River found herself walking the familiar gravel path that led to the Hayes family ranch. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the cottonwood trees that lined Willow Creek were already showing hints of gold. In the distance, the Mission Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks crowned with early snow that caught the afternoon light. Master Chief Michael Hayes was exactly where River expected to find him, in the barn, methodically cleaning his collection of vintage firearms. At 72, he still maintained the rigid posture and deliberate movements of a career Navy man. His silver hair was cut in a regulation crew cut that had never varied in the 40 years since his retirement, and his weathered hands moved with the precision that came from decades of handling weapons in situations where perfection wasn't optional. "How was school, sweetheart?" he asked without looking up from the disassembled rifle on his workbench. "Aiden Garrison was being an ass again," River said, dropping her backpack beside the barn door and settling onto her usual perch on a bale of hay. The Master Chief's eyebrows rose slightly. "Language, River." "Sorry, Aiden was being a posterior opening." She corrected with a small smile, using the euphemism he had taught her years ago. "Better," he acknowledged, finally looking up from his work. His eyes, the same steel gray that River had inherited, studied her face with the intensity of someone trained to read situations quickly and accurately. What did young Garrison say this time? River pulled her essay from her backpack, the paper now slightly wrinkled from being clutched too tightly. "Mrs. Jimenez assigned us to write about our personal heroes. I wrote about Mom." The Master Chief set down his cleaning rod and gave River his full attention. This was the conversation he had been dreading since the day his daughter had accepted her first classified assignment. "And?" "Aiden said his dad doesn't have any record of Mom being in the military, called her imaginary, said she abandoned us." River's voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the pain she had been trying to hide. Master Chief Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the framed photograph on his workbench. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside a woman in navy dress blues, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her eyes holding the same determination that now burned in River's. Commander Patricia Blaze Hayes, though the inscription on the back simply read, "Trisha and Dad, 2019. "Your mother made choices that required sacrifices," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of secrets he couldn't share. "Some of those sacrifices are harder to bear than others." "But she is serving, isn't she, Grandpa?" River asked. The question that had haunted her through years of missed birthdays and empty chairs at school events finally spoken aloud. The phone calls, the letters that come with no return address, the way you get that look when the news talks about operations in places they can't name? The Master Chief studied his granddaughter's face, seeing in her features the same stubborn loyalty that had driven her mother to volunteer for assignments that officially didn't exist. "Your mother is the most dedicated service member I've ever known," he said carefully, "and I've known quite a few in my time." "Then why won't anyone believe me when I tell them that?" "Because some truths are classified above the pay grade of principals and town gossips," he replied, returning to his rifle cleaning with movements that seemed casual but were anything but. "But truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right." River watched her grandfather work, noting the way his shoulders had tensed slightly. There was something in his tone, a certainty that suggested he knew more about timing than he was letting on. "Grandpa, what aren't you telling me?" The Master Chief glanced at his watch, a military-issued timepiece that had counted down missions in places that remained classified decades later. The hands showed 3:47 p.m. "Sometimes, sweetheart, patience is the most powerful weapon in our arsenal." Before River could ask what he meant, the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway announced an unexpected visitor. Through the barn's open doorway, they could see Principal Ruth Garrison's silver sedan pulling up to the house, followed by a white car that River recognized as belonging to Dr. Amanda Sheffield, the district's consulting psychologist. "Stay here," Master Chief Hayes instructed, his voice taking on the command tone that brooked no argument. He set aside his cleaning supplies and walked toward the house with the measured stride of someone approaching a battlefield. River waited exactly 30 seconds before following at a distance that would allow her to hear the conversation without being seen. She positioned herself behind the large oak tree that had served as her childhood fort and adult refuge, its massive trunk providing perfect cover while she listened to the adults discuss her future. "Michael, we need to talk about River," Principal Garrison began, her voice carrying the officious tone that had made her universally unpopular among students and parents alike. "There's been an incident at school involving some concerning claims she's been making." "What kind of claims?" Master Chief Hayes asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Dr. Sheffield stepped forward, her clipboard held like a shield. "River has been telling other students that her mother is a Navy SEAL. She's written an essay about her mother's supposed military service that contains very specific details about special operations. We're concerned about her psychological well-being." "My granddaughter doesn't lie," the Master Chief replied flatly. "Mr. Hayes, we understand this is difficult," Principal Garrison continued, "but we've checked with the Navy Personnel Command. There's no record of any Patricia Hayes serving in any special operations capacity. In fact, according to their records, she was discharged 8 years ago as an administrative specialist." From her hiding place, River felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Administrative specialist. The words felt like a physical blow, striking at the foundation of everything she had believed about her mother. But then she remembered the midnight training sessions by Flathead Lake, her mother's hands guiding her through water survival techniques that seemed far beyond what any administrative specialist would need to know. She remembered the scars on her mother's arms that looked like knife wounds, the way she moved through their house at night like she was navigating enemy territory. "I see," Master Chief Hayes said, his voice giving nothing away. "We're recommending that River undergo a psychological evaluation," Dr. Sheffield announced. These fantasies about her mother could be a coping mechanism for abandonment, but they're becoming increasingly elaborate and concerning. "You want to have my granddaughter committed because she wrote an essay about her mother," the Master Chief said, the words carrying a dangerous edge that made even River nervous. "Not committed," Principal Garrison clarified quickly. "Evaluated. We want to help her process her feelings about her mother's absence in a healthier way." Master Chief Hayes checked his watch again. 4:15 p.m. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll have to consider other options," Dr. Sheffield replied. River's essay contains detailed descriptions of classified military procedures. The level of specificity suggests either extensive research into classified materials or a concerning detachment from reality. Either way, it requires professional intervention. River pressed closer to the tree, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the adults could hear it. They were talking about her like she was broken, like her memories of her mother's training were symptoms of mental illness rather than preparation for a life that existed in the shadows between truth and national security. "We've scheduled a hearing for Thursday afternoon," Principal Garrison continued. "The school board wants to address this matter formally before considering River's continued enrollment." "A hearing," the Master Chief repeated, his voice flat and dangerous. "At the community center. 3 o'clock. Dr. Sheffield confirmed, consulting her clipboard. "We've notified the appropriate stakeholders." "Stakeholders?" Master Chief Hayes said, and River could hear the contempt in his voice. "How many people are we talking about?" "The school board, district administration, and concerned community members," Principal Garrison replied. "We believe transparency is important in matters like these." River closed her eyes, imagining the scene, herself sitting alone at a table while the entire town watched her be dissected and analyzed, her truth dismissed as delusion, her mother's sacrifice reduced to abandonment. It was exactly the kind of public humiliation that would follow her for the rest of her life in a town where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. But as the adults continued their discussion, River noticed something in her grandfather's posture that gave her hope. Master Chief Hayes stood with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew something his opponents didn't. His frequent glances at his watch weren't nervous habits. They were the actions of a man operating on a timeline that the others couldn't see. "We'll be there," he said finally, his voice carrying a finality that ended the conversation. After the officials departed, River emerged from her hiding place to find her grandfather sitting on the porch steps, his cell phone in his hand. He was typing a message with the careful precision of someone who understood that words carried consequences. "Grandpa?" River approached cautiously. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, patting the step beside him. "We need to talk." River settled beside him, noting that his message was being sent to a contact listed simply as Control. The response came back almost immediately, a single word that made Master Chief Hayes smile for the first time in days. "What's going to happen at the hearing?" River asked. Master Chief Hayes looked at his watch one more time, then at his granddaughter's worried face. "Sometimes, River, the cavalry arrives just when you think you're surrounded. And sometimes, quote," he added, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had spent 40 years learning when to reveal classified information, "the people who think they know everything are about to learn how much they don't know." In the distance, the first of the black SUVs was already turning onto the highway that led to Willow Creek, carrying passengers who had been waiting 8 years for the opportunity to defend one of their own. But that was still 2 days away, and River Hayes had a hearing to survive first. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of gray October sky that made Willow Creek feel smaller than its 8,500 residents. River Hayes sat at the kitchen table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate while Master Chief Hayes read the local newspaper with the methodical attention he applied to everything. The Willow Creek Herald had always been thin on actual news, but today it seemed particularly focused on high school football scores and the upcoming Harvest Festival. "You're not eating," he observed, without looking up from the sports section. "Not hungry," River replied, abandoning any pretense of interest in breakfast. The hearing was less than 30 hours away, and her stomach had been tied in knots since she'd overheard Principal Garrison's comments about concerned community members. Master Chief Hayes folded the newspaper with military precision and studied his granddaughter's face. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd slept as poorly as he had, though for different reasons. While River had been worrying about public humiliation, he'd been coordinating logistics with people whose names didn't appear in any phone directory. "River, I want you to understand something," he said, his voice carrying the gravity reserved for important lessons. "Tomorrow, when they try to break you down, remember that truth doesn't change because people choose not to believe it." "But what if I'm wrong?" River asked, the question that had been haunting her since Dr. Sheffield mentioned her mother's official service record. "What if my memories are mixed up? What if I've been telling stories for so long that I started believing them myself?" Master Chief Hayes reached across the table and took his granddaughter's hand, his calloused fingers enclosing hers with gentle strength. "Tell me about the scar on your mother's left shoulder." River closed her eyes, accessing memories she'd carried like treasures for years, shaped like a crescent moon. "She said she got it during advanced combat training, but never told me the details. It's about 2 inches long, just below her collarbone." "And the way she taught you to swim at the lake?" "Always at night, always with weights. She made me practice holding my breath underwater until I could stay down for almost 3 minutes. River recited, her voice growing stronger with each detail. "She taught me how to swim silently, how to enter water without making splashes." "Administrative specialists don't learn those skills," Master Chief Hayes said firmly. "And they don't get scars from advanced combat training." The sound of gravel in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the kitchen window, they could see Coach Eduardo Guerrero's beat-up Ford pickup truck pulling alongside the house. The PE teacher and Marine veteran climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg that still carried shrapnel from his final deployment in Afghanistan. "Coach Guerrero," River said, surprised. "Why is he here?" Master Chief Hayes stood to answer the door, but his expression suggested the visit wasn't unexpected. "Eduardo served 3 tours with Marine Force Recon," he said quietly. "He understands the difference between truth and official records." Coach Guerrero knocked once and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through years of friendship with the Master Chief. At 45, he still carried himself with the compact readiness of someone trained for combat, though civilian life had softened some of his harder edges. His weathered face showed concern as he nodded to River, then focused on her grandfather. "Michael, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying traces of the accent he'd inherited from grandparents who'd crossed the border with nothing but determination and hope. Word spreading about tomorrow's hearing. "How bad?" Master Chief Hayes asked, already moving toward the coffee pot. "Murphy's Diner was buzzing this morning. Half the town thinks River needs professional help. The other half thinks your family's been running some kind of con." Coach Guerrero reported, accepting the offered cup with grateful hands. "Principal Garrison's been making calls to school board members in other districts, talking about precedent and procedures." River felt heat rising in her cheeks. The idea of her private struggle becoming entertainment for coffee shop conversations made her want to disappear entirely. "They're talking about me like I'm crazy." "No, mija," Coach Guerrero said gently, using the term of endearment that had made him popular with students who needed someone to believe in them. "They're talking like people who've never had to keep secrets that matter. There's a difference." Master Chief Hayes poured himself coffee and settled back at the table, his movements deliberate and calm, Eduardo, what do you know about classified operations? The former Marine's expression grew serious. I know that some things happen in places that don't exist, done by people who were never there. I know that families pay prices that civilians can't understand. He looked directly at River. And I know that kids like you sometimes carry truths that adults aren't cleared to hear. You believe me? River asked, hope creeping into her voice. I've seen your swimming technique, Coach Guerrero replied. No 14-year-old learns combat water survival from YouTube videos. Someone with serious training taught you those skills. The validation felt like oxygen after nearly drowning. River had grown so accustomed to doubt and disbelief that hearing an adult acknowledge her truth without question almost brought tears to her eyes. There's something else, Coach Guerrero continued, his voice dropping to the tone he used for sensitive information. Sheriff Stone stopped by the school yesterday afternoon. Spent about an hour in Principal Garrison's office with Dr. Sheffield. Master Chief Hayes set down his coffee cup with careful precision. Cameron was asking questions? About your family's background? About Patricia's service record? About whether there might be federal implications to the hearing tomorrow? Coach Guerrero confirmed. Principal Garrison looked nervous when they finished talking. River watched her grandfather process this information, noting the subtle change in his posture. Sheriff Cameron Stone had served 2 tours with the Army Rangers before returning to Willow Creek to take over law enforcement. Unlike Principal Garrison or Dr. Sheffield, he understood the complexities of military service that existed beyond official paperwork. Did Cameron seem concerned? Master Chief Hayes asked. He seemed like a man who'd been told to ask questions he didn't want answers to, Coach Guerrero replied carefully. But he also seemed like someone who remembers what classified really means. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, this one, a small hybrid car that River recognized as belonging to Mrs. Teresa Jimenez. Her English teacher parked carefully beside Coach Guerrero's truck and walked to the door with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. Mrs. J? River called through the screen door. River, I'm glad you're here, Mrs. Jimenez said, entering the kitchen with the natural ease of someone who had spent years navigating family dynamics. I wanted to speak with you and your grandfather about tomorrow. Master Chief Hayes gestured toward an empty chair, his military courtesy extending to educators who had earned his respect. Coffee? Please, Mrs. Jimenez accepted, settling her purse carefully beside her chair. I've been thinking about River's essay all night, about the details she included. River tensed, preparing for another adult to question her credibility, but Mrs. Jimenez's expression held curiosity rather than skepticism. River, you wrote about your mother teaching you tactical breathing techniques. Can you describe them? 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out, 4 count hold. River recited automatically. She called it box breathing, said it helps maintain focus under stress. Mrs. Jimenez nodded thoughtfully. I spent 15 years married to a man who did 2 tours with Special Forces. He used the same technique. Her voice carried the weight of memories, both treasured and painful. He also had scars that he couldn't explain, and skills that seemed excessive for his official job description. You were married to Special Forces? Coach Guerrero asked, clearly surprised. Past tense, Mrs. Jimenez replied with a sad smile. David didn't make it home from his 2nd deployment. But I learned enough about military families to recognize the signs. River's essay doesn't read like fantasy. It reads like the experiences of someone who grew up around classified operations. The kitchen fell silent as the adults exchanged glances loaded with unspoken understanding. River found herself surrounded by people who understood the weight of military service in ways that Principal Garrison and Dr. Sheffield never could. Teresa, what are you thinking? Master Chief Hayes asked carefully. I'm thinking that tomorrow's hearing is going to be a disaster unless someone speaks up for River, Mrs. Jimenez replied. Dr. Sheffield has already submitted her preliminary assessment to the school board. She's recommending psychological evaluation and possible alternative education placement. Alternative education? River's voice cracked. Like homeschooling. Like removal from the regular school environment pending resolution of what she's calling persistent delusional behavior, Mrs. Jimenez clarified, her teacher's instinct making her precise with language that would affect a student's future. She's framing your essay as evidence of an unstable relationship with reality. Coach Guerrero's jaw tightened. That's bullshit, Teresa. Sorry for the language, but that's exactly what it is. Eduardo's right, Mrs. Jimenez agreed, which is why I'm planning to attend tomorrow's hearing, as River's teacher and as someone who understands military families. Master Chief Hayes checked his watch, a habit that River was beginning to recognize as significant. The hands showed 10:30 a.m., and his expression held the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans were proceeding on schedule. I appreciate the support, he said carefully, but tomorrow might unfold differently than any of us expect. What do you mean? Mrs. Jimenez asked. I mean that sometimes the best defense is allowing the truth to speak for itself, Master Chief Hayes replied, his voice carrying implications that made both adults study his face with renewed interest. River spent the remainder of Wednesday in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. School felt surreal, with teachers treating her with the careful politeness reserved for students facing serious trouble. Classmates whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, their conversations a mixture of sympathy, speculation, and cruel amusement. During lunch, she sat with Stella Davis in their usual spot near the windows that overlooked the parking lot. Stella had been her closest friend since 3rd grade, one of the few people who had never questioned River's stories about her mother's mysterious job. Are you scared about tomorrow? Stella asked, picking at her sandwich without much interest. Terrified, River admitted. What if they're right? What if I've been making everything up? Stella studied her friend's face with the intensity of someone who had spent years observing subtle changes in mood and expression. River, remember when we were 10 and you taught me how to tie those weird knots? Which knots? The ones you said your mom showed you for securing gear during water operations. I still use that bowline knot when I'm helping my dad with the boat, Stella continued. Where did you learn that if not from your mom? River closed her eyes, remembering the evening by Flathead Lake when her mother had patiently guided her hands through the complex sequence of loops and pulls. She said it could save my life someday. Administrative specialists don't teach their kids maritime survival knots, Stella said firmly, echoing Master Chief Hayes' earlier assertion. And they don't disappear for months at a time on missions they can't discuss. The afternoon dragged by with the agonizing slowness of time before significant events. River found herself watching the clock in each classroom, counting down hours until she would face the assembled judgment of her community. By the time the final bell released her from academic obligation, her nerves had been stretched to the breaking point. Walking home along the gravel road that led to the Hayes Ranch, River noticed details that usually escaped her attention. The way the October lights slanted through the cottonwood trees, the distant sound of cattle calling to each other across the pastures, the smell of wood smoke from chimneys already active against the evening chill. Everything felt sharp and vivid, as if her anxiety had heightened her awareness of the world around her. Master Chief Hayes was waiting on the porch when she arrived, his expression calm but alert. Beside him sat Agent Benjamin Cooper, a man River had never seen before, but who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. His dark suit and serious expression suggested official business. River, this is Agent Cooper, Master Chief Hayes said as she climbed the porch steps. He's here to discuss tomorrow's hearing. Agent Cooper stood and extended his hand with professional courtesy. Miss Hayes, I understand you've been having some difficulties at school. Yes, sir, River replied carefully, noting that the agent's handshake was firm but not intimidating. I've reviewed your essay, Agent Cooper continued, settling back into his chair. It contains some very specific technical details about naval special operations. River's heart sank. Another adult who thought she'd researched classified information to create elaborate fantasies. I didn't look anything up online, she said defensively. Everything I wrote came from what my mom taught me. I believe you, Agent Cooper said simply, and the words hit River like a physical shock. In fact, your essay contains operational details that aren't available in any public sources, details that could only come from someone with direct experience in classified programs. The world seemed to tilt slightly as River processed the implications of the agent's statement. You mean my mom really is? I mean that tomorrow's hearing is going to raise questions that some people aren't prepared to answer, Agent Cooper replied carefully. And my presence here is to ensure that certain information remains properly classified, while still addressing the concerns that have been raised about your well-being. Master Chief Hayes checked his watch again, 4:45 p.m. "How much longer?" he asked Agent Cooper. "Approximately 18 hours, the agent replied, consulting his own timepiece. "All units are in position." River looked between the two men, understanding dawning like sunrise after a long night. "She's coming, isn't she? Mom's actually coming to the hearing." "Your mother has made certain sacrifices for national security," Agent Cooper said diplomatically. "But no one, especially not a 14-year-old girl, should have to face accusations of mental illness because they told the truth about their family's service to this country." As evening fell over Willow Creek, River Hayes sat on her bedroom windowsill and watched the lights come on in houses scattered across the valley. Tomorrow, many of the people in those houses would gather to judge her credibility and question her sanity. But for the first time in months, she felt the quiet confidence that came from knowing the truth would finally have its day in court. In the distance, barely visible against the darkening sky, 3 black SUVs moved along the highway toward town, carrying passengers who had spent years serving in the shadows and were now prepared to step into the light to defend one of their own. Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of Montana sky that stretched endlessly blue above the Mission Mountains. River Hayes stood at her bedroom window, watching frost melt from the pasture grass as the sun climbed higher. The hearing was 6 hours away, and despite Agent Cooper's reassurances, her stomach felt like it housed a convention of angry hornets. Downstairs, Master Chief Hayes moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee brewed in exact measurements, breakfast prepared according to decades of habit, newspaper folded in perfect quarters. But River noticed the differences. The way he checked his phone every few minutes, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful attention he paid to the access road that led to their property. "You need to eat something," he said as River descended the stairs, gesturing toward a plate of toast and scrambled eggs that would normally tempt her appetite. "Can't," River replied, settling at the kitchen table without touching the food. "My stomach feels like it's tied in sailor's knots." "Bowlines or clove hitches?" Master Chief Hayes asked with a small smile, referencing the maritime skills that had become evidence in her current predicament. "Both," River said, managing a weak laugh despite her anxiety. "Grandpa, what if this goes wrong? What if they decide I'm delusional and send me away for treatment?" Master Chief Hayes set down his coffee and studied his granddaughter's face with the careful assessment he'd once applied to mission briefings. "River, do you trust me?" "Of course." "Then trust that some plans take years to execute properly," he said, his voice carrying the weight of secrets that were finally approaching their expiration date. "And trust that your mother didn't spend 15 years in the shadows just to let her daughter face this alone." The sound of vehicles in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the kitchen window, they could see Sheriff Cameron Stone's patrol car pulling up to the house, followed by Coach Guerrero's pickup truck. Both men emerged with the purposeful movements of people operating on carefully coordinated schedules. Sheriff Stone knocked once before entering, his presence filling the kitchen with the authority that came from years of law enforcement experience. At 52, he still carried himself with the compact readiness of his Ranger days, though civilian life had softened some of his harder edges. His weathered face showed concern as he nodded to River, then focused on Master Chief Hayes. "Michael, we need to discuss security for this afternoon," he said without preamble. "What kind of security concerns?" Master Chief Hayes asked, though his tone suggested the question was for River's benefit rather than his own information. "Federal interest," Sheriff Stone replied carefully, glancing at River before continuing. "I've been advised that today's hearing may involve classified matters that require special protocols." Coach Guerrero settled into a chair without invitation, his movement careful around the old shrapnel wound that still bothered him on cold mornings. "Cameron, how much federal interest are we talking about?" "The kind that comes with advanced teams and communication protocols I haven't seen since my deployment days," Sheriff Stone replied. "The kind that suggests today's hearing isn't going to proceed the way Principal Garrison expects." River watched the exchange with growing understanding. These weren't random visits from concerned community members. These were coordinated check-ins from people who understood operational security and were following procedures established by someone with authority to command such coordination. "Will I be safe?" River asked, the question emerging from a 14-year-old's natural fear of adult complexities beyond her control. "Safer than you've been in months," Sheriff Stone assured her. "Whatever happens this afternoon, you won't face it without protection." Master Chief Hayes checked his watch. 9:30 a.m. Time for school, he announced, though River noticed he made no move to gather his keys for the drive. Actually, Coach Guerrero interjected. "Principal Garrison has excused River from classes today. She wants her to rest before the hearing." "More likely she wants me isolated so I can't talk to anyone who might support me," River said, her insight into adult motivations sharpened by months of navigating institutional skepticism. "Smart girl," Sheriff Stone acknowledged with approval. "But isolation works both ways. Sometimes it protects you from interference while your advocates organize." The morning passed in a strange suspension of normal routine. River tried reading, attempted homework, and finally gave up on productive activity in favor of nervous pacing. Master Chief Hayes maintained his calm exterior while conducting quiet phone conversations in his study, speaking in the clipped tones that suggested military coordination. Around noon, Mrs. Teresa Jimenez arrived with a casserole dish and the determined expression of someone preparing for battle. She had dressed in her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that conveyed authority while remaining appropriately conservative for a school hearing. "How are you holding up, Mija?" she asked River, using the term of endearment that always made River feel less alone in the world. "Scared," River admitted, accepting the hug that Mrs. Jimenez offered with maternal warmth. "Everyone keeps saying things will be fine, but no one will tell me exactly what's going to happen. Sometimes the best strategies require operational security," Mrs. Jimenez replied, her word choice making both Master Chief Hayes and Coach Guerrero look at her with new interest. "My late husband taught me that successful operations depend on everyone playing their part without knowing the complete picture." "Your husband was Special Forces," Coach Guerrero said, understanding dawning in his voice. "You know more about this than you've been letting on." Mrs. Jimenez smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose credentials had finally been recognized. "David spent 12 years in classified programs. I learned to recognize the signs of operational planning, and I learned to trust that some truths reveal themselves according to schedules that civilians don't understand." At 1:30 p.m., they began the journey to the Willow Creek Community Center. Master Chief Hayes drove with the measured care of someone who understood that arriving too early could be as problematic as arriving late. River sat in the passenger seat, watching familiar landmarks pass by with the heightened awareness that accompanied significant life events. The community center parking lot was already crowded when they arrived. Cars filled every available space, with overflow parking extending onto the grass areas that normally hosted summer festivals and 4th of July celebrations. River counted at least 50 vehicles, suggesting that Principal Garrison's, quote, concerned community members had grown into a substantial audience for her public examination. "This many people?" River asked, her voice catching slightly. "Small towns love drama," Master Chief Hayes replied calmly, but River noticed his eyes scanning the parking lot with tactical assessment, especially when they think they understand the situation better than the people actually living it. They entered through the main doors, passing clusters of townspeople who fell silent as River walked by. She recognized faces from Murphy's Diner, the grocery store, church services, and school events. People who had known her since childhood now studied her with the uncomfortable mixture of sympathy and curiosity reserved for community members who had become subjects of public speculation. The main hall had been arranged like a courtroom, with a long table facing rows of folding chairs that were rapidly filling with spectators. Principal Ruth Garrison sat at the center of the authority table, flanked by Dr. Amanda Sheffield and 3 school board members, whose expressions suggested they considered this hearing an unfortunate but necessary duty. Judge Frances Hartwell occupied a special chair positioned to suggest advisory rather than judicial authority, though her presence clearly elevated the proceedings beyond simple administrative review. At 83, she retained the sharp intelligence that had made her a respected federal judge before retirement, and her gray eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the gathering crowd. River took her assigned seat at the small table facing the panel, feeling exposed and vulnerable under the collective gaze of her community. Master Chief Hayes sat directly behind her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of attention and speculation swirling around them. "We have quite a turnout," Principal Garrison observed with barely concealed satisfaction. "I think this demonstrates the community's investment in our young people's well-being." Or their investment in public entertainment, Master Chief Hayes replied quietly, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several nearby spectators shift uncomfortably. Dr. Sheffield arranged her papers with professional precision, her expression conveying the confident authority of someone who had diagnosed River's condition and was prepared to present her findings to a receptive audience. "We're here to address concerning behaviors that require intervention," she announced. Miss Hayes has been exhibiting persistent delusional thinking about her mother's military service. River felt heat rising in her cheeks as whispered conversations rippled through the crowd. She could hear fragments of commentary. "Poor girl. Needs help. Family's been lying for years." The collective judgment felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Mrs. Jimenez entered quietly and took a seat in the third row, her presence providing some comfort to River's growing sense of isolation. Coach Guerrero followed shortly after, positioning himself where River could see his supportive expression. Sheriff Stone stood near the back of the hall, his official presence suggesting security rather than participation. "Before we begin," Judge Hartwell said, her voice carrying the authority that made even Principal Garrison pay attention, "I want to establish that this is an educational hearing, not a legal proceeding. However, given the serious nature of the allegations, I want to ensure that proper procedures are followed." "What kind of allegations?" someone called from the audience. "Fabrication of military service records," Dr. Sheffield replied promptly. "Miss Hayes has written extensively about her mother's supposed participation in classified operations. She's described training techniques, operational procedures, and equipment that suggest either extensive research into classified materials or significant disconnection from reality." "Man, buddy." River closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice in memory. "Someday, sweetheart, people will understand why I couldn't be there for school plays and birthday parties. Someday they'll know that every moment away from you was in service of something bigger than our family." "Miss Hayes," Principal Garrison addressed her directly, "would you like to respond to Dr. Sheffield's assessment?" River opened her eyes and looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her. Some showed sympathy, others skepticism, but most reflected the uncomfortable fascination that accompanied someone else's public humiliation. She thought about the midnight swimming lessons, the tactical breathing techniques, the scars her mother couldn't explain. "My mother taught me everything I wrote about," River said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "She's not abandoning us. She's serving her country in ways that require sacrifice from all of us." "Sacrifice like missing your entire childhood?" Dr. Sheffield asked with false sympathy. "Miss Hayes, fabricating heroic reasons for parental absence is a common coping mechanism, but it becomes problematic when the fantasy interferes with reality." "It's not a fantasy," River insisted, her voice growing stronger, "and she's not absent, she's deployed." "Where?" Principal Garrison demanded. "What unit?" "What? Operations?" River met her gaze steadily. "Classified." The laughter that followed felt like a slap. It started with a few chuckles from the audience and grew into a wave of amused disbelief that made River want to disappear entirely. But Master Chief Hayes leaned forward slightly, and she caught his whispered words, "Hold fast. Truth incoming." Outside the community center, barely audible above the sound of community mockery, helicopter rotors began their approach to Willow Creek. The laughter died abruptly as the unmistakable sound of military helicopters grew louder, their rotors beating a rhythm that made the community center's windows vibrate. Principal Garrison's confident expression faltered as she glanced toward the ceiling, then at Sheriff Stone, whose radio had suddenly crackled to life with urgent chatter. "Control, we have incoming military aircraft requesting immediate landing clearance at the community center," a dispatcher's voice announced through the static. "Federal authority confirmed. All units stand by." Dr. Sheffield looked up from her papers with growing alarm. "What's happening?" Judge Hartwell leaned forward, her judicial experience recognizing the shift from routine hearing to something far more significant. "Sheriff Stone, do you have information about this arrival?" Sheriff Stone pressed his earpiece, listening to communications that were clearly beyond standard local law enforcement protocols. "Federal operation," he announced to the increasingly agitated crowd. "Everyone remain calm and stay seated." River felt her grandfather's hand rest gently on her shoulder, his touch conveying both support and the quiet satisfaction of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan was finally reaching its crescendo. Master Chief Hayes checked his watch one final time, 3:47 p.m., right on schedule. The helicopters passed directly overhead, their sound so overwhelming that conversation became impossible. Through the community center's high windows, River caught glimpses of aircraft that she recognized from her mother's late-night training videos. Sleek, black machines designed for rapid insertion and extraction of special operations personnel. Michael, Judge Hartwell called to Master Chief Hayes, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to demanding answers in complex situations. "Do you know what's happening here?" "Justice," Master Chief Hayes replied simply, his voice carrying across the now silent hall with the clarity of someone who had spent decades projecting command presence. The helicopter settled onto the grass field adjacent to the community center, their rotors continuing to spin at idle while maintaining readiness for immediate departure. Through the windows, the crowd could see figures in naval combat uniforms emerging from the aircraft with the coordinated precision that spoke of years training together in high-stakes environments. Principal Garrison attempted to restore her authority over the proceedings. "This is highly irregular. We're conducting official school business, and I don't see how military personnel have any relevance to—" Her words were cut off as the community center's main doors opened with the synchronous precision of a choreographed operation. 6 figures in desert camouflage entered in formation, their faces displaying the focused calm that characterized operators comfortable in hostile environments. Each carried themselves with the coiled readiness of people trained to respond to threats with lethal efficiency. The crowd's attention focused immediately on the woman leading the formation. Commander Patricia Blaze Hayes moved with the fluid grace of someone equally comfortable jumping from aircraft at 30,000 feet or navigating diplomatic receptions in foreign capitals. At 42, she retained the lean physicality that special operations demanded, though years of classified service had added lines around her eyes that spoke of decisions made in circumstances where failure meant death. Her uniform displayed ribbons and insignia that only military personnel would fully recognize, but their quantity and arrangement suggested service far beyond what any administrative specialist would accumulate. The silver trident pinned above her left breast pocket caught the fluorescent light, its symbolism unmistakable to anyone familiar with naval special warfare. River's breath caught in her throat. 8 months of separation collapsed in an instant. She took in details both familiar and new. The scar below her mother's left collarbone, now visible above her uniform collar. The way she held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right, compensating for an injury that had occurred during an operation River would never be cleared to know about. The same steel-gray eyes that River saw in her own reflection every morning. "Commander Patricia Hayes," she announced, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of leading operations where hesitation meant mission failure. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The silence that followed felt absolute. 200 people who had gathered to witness River's humiliation now found themselves face to face with living proof that everything they had dismissed as fantasy was, in fact, classified reality. Dr. Sheffield recovered first, her professional training asserting itself despite the dramatic shift in circumstances. "Commander Hayes, I'm Dr. Amanda Sheffield. I've been conducting a psychological evaluation of your daughter regarding claims she's made about your military service." Patricia's gaze settled on the psychologist with the intensity that had once been trained on enemy combatants in places that didn't appear on any official maps. "What kind of claims?" "She's been telling people that you're a Navy SEAL," Principal Garrison interjected, her voice carrying the condescending tone of someone explaining obvious delusions to their subject's family member. "We've checked with Navy Personnel Command. Your official record shows service as an administrative specialist." "My cover record," Patricia replied, her words causing a visible ripple of recognition among the military veterans scattered throughout the crowd. "Standard protocol for classified personnel requires maintaining official documentation that protects operational security." She reached into her uniform jacket and produced a leather folder bearing seals that several people recognized as indicating the highest levels of government classification. Opening it with deliberate movements, she revealed documents that even from a distance were clearly marked with security designations far beyond anything the civilian population had ever encountered. "These were declassified at 0600 this morning," Patricia announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "Executive authorization for limited disclosure in response to circumstances affecting the welfare of military family members." Lieutenant Commander Victor Wraith Herrera stepped forward, his presence adding weight to Patricia's revelations. As her team leader for the past 6 years, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had coordinated operations that would never appear in any public record of military achievement. Principal Garrison, he addressed the school administrator with formal courtesy that somehow managed to convey complete contempt. Commander Hayes has served with distinction in classified operations across 4 continents. Her absence from her daughter's daily life represents sacrifice in service of national security, not abandonment. Petty Officer Amanda Cobra Martinez moved to flank Patricia's right side, her compact frame radiating the controlled violence that special operations training instilled in all its graduates. At 28, she represented the next generation of female operators whose existence had been denied for decades. River's essay contains operational details that aren't available in any public sources, she announced, her voice carrying traces of the Texas accent that had survived years of military standardization. Details that could only come from direct instruction by someone with extensive special operations experience. River found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Mom?" Patricia's professional composure cracked slightly as she focused on her daughter for the first time since entering the hall. The woman who had led raids against terrorist compounds and conducted solo reconnaissance missions in hostile territory struggled to maintain emotional control as she took in River's face, noting the strain that months of separation and community skepticism had created. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying warmth that contrasted sharply with the command presence she had projected moments earlier. "I'm sorry it took so long to come home." Master Chief Hayes rose from his seat, his movement drawing attention to the family dynamic that had been invisible to the community for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the gravity of someone revealing state secrets. "My daughter has spent 15 years serving in operations that required her existence to remain classified. That meant missing school events, birthday parties, and ordinary moments that most families take for granted." Dr. Sheffield attempted to reassert her professional authority. "Commander Hayes, while I respect your service, I'm concerned about the psychological impact on River of maintaining these elaborate narratives about classified operations." Patricia's expression hardened as she turned her full attention to the psychologist. "Dr. Sheffield, my daughter has shown more courage in this room than I've seen in some combat zones. She defended her family's honor when lying would have been easier. She maintained operational security while under hostile interrogation." "Hostile interrogation?" Principal Garrison protested. "This is an educational hearing designed to help River process. This is a public humiliation designed to break a 14-year-old girl who told the truth when adults decided it was more convenient to believe she was delusional," Patricia interrupted, her voice carrying the steel that had once been directed at enemy commanders who underestimated American resolve. Agent Benjamin Cooper emerged from his position near the back wall, his federal credentials now openly displayed. "Principal Garrison, Dr. Sheffield, I'm Agent Cooper, Naval Intelligence. Your hearing today has involved the unauthorized disclosure of classified family information and the public harassment of a minor whose parent serves in sensitive national security roles." The implications of Agent Cooper's statement settled over the crowd like smoke from a house fire. What had begun as community entertainment had suddenly become a federal matter involving classified operations and potential security violations. Reverend Daniel Preston stood slowly, his clerical authority carrying weight in a community that still respected religious leadership. "Commander Hayes, I think I speak for many of us when I say we owe you and your family an apology. We should have trusted River's word instead of questioning her character." "Some of you should have," Patricia agreed, her gaze sweeping across faces that had participated in her daughter's public trial. "Others chose entertainment over empathy. There's a difference." Mrs. Jimenez rose from her seat in the third row, her voice carrying the emotion of someone who understood military sacrifice from personal experience. "River, I'm sorry we didn't fight harder for you. Your essay was beautiful and true, and we should have recognized that from the beginning." Coach Guerrero stood as well, his Marine training making him one of the few people in the room who fully grasped the significance of Patricia's uniform decorations. "Commander, thank you for your service. And thank you for raising a daughter with the courage to defend her family's honor." River watched the adults navigate the sudden reversal of her fortune, feeling simultaneously vindicated and exhausted. Months of carrying classified truths had taken their toll, And even victory felt complicated when it required her mother's operational security to be compromised. "Can I come home now?" River asked, her voice carrying the weight of years spent wondering when her family would be whole again. Patricia's professional mask slipped entirely as she knelt beside her daughter's chair, taking River's hands in her own scarred ones. "I'm home now, sweetheart. For good this time." Outside, the helicopters began spooling up for departure, their mission complete. But inside the Willow Creek Community Center, a family was finally free to begin the process of healing wounds that classification requirements had forced them to bear in silence. The aftermath of revelation settled over the community center like dust after an explosion. Patricia Hayes maintained her position near River's table while her team conducted what appeared to be casual observation, but was actually tactical assessment of potential threats. In the span of 15 minutes, a routine school hearing had transformed into a federal incident involving classified personnel and potential security violations. Principal Garrison sat frozen behind her administrative table, her face cycling through expressions of shock, embarrassment, and growing terror as she processed the implications of what had just occurred. Her confident authority had evaporated completely, replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that she had just publicly humiliated the daughter of someone whose service record contained more classified operations than she had years of education experience. Dr. Sheffield frantically shuffled through her papers, searching for some framework that would allow her to maintain professional credibility in the face of evidence that demolished her psychological assessment. Her diagnosis of persistent delusional thinking now appeared as professional incompetence documented before 200 witnesses. "Mom," River said quietly, her voice barely audible above the whispered conversations rippling through the crowd. "Are you really home? Like actually home? Or is this just another mission?" Patricia knelt beside her daughter's chair, her combat-hardened exterior softening as she focused on the one person whose opinion mattered more than operational success or professional recognition. "This is home, sweetheart. My team leader has recommended me for a training position at Coronado. No more deployments, no more extended separations." Lieutenant Commander Herrera stepped forward, his presence commanding attention from even the most skeptical community members. "River, your mother has completed her operational obligation to naval special warfare. She's earned the right to raise her daughter without the burden of classification requirements." The words carried implications that resonated differently throughout the crowd. Military families understood the significance of completing classified service obligations. Civilian families began to grasp the magnitude of sacrifice that had been dismissed as abandonment. Judge Hartwell rose slowly, her judicial experience providing framework for processing extraordinary circumstances. Principal Garrison, Dr. Sheffield, "I think this hearing has reached its natural conclusion. Ms. Hayes has been thoroughly vindicated." "Your Honor," Dr. Sheffield attempted one final professional assertion. "While I respect Commander Hayes' service, the psychological impact on River of maintaining classified family secrets still requires evaluation." Agent Cooper approached the psychologist with the measured steps of someone whose patience had been exhausted by civilian incompetence. "Dr. Sheffield, you've just publicly diagnosed the daughter of a classified operator with mental illness based on your failure to recognize operational security protocols. I suggest you focus on damage control rather than doubling down on professional negligence." The federal agent's words hit Dr. Sheffield like physical blows. Her career had been built on authority within civilian educational systems, but she was now facing federal oversight of her professional conduct. The psychological evaluation that had seemed routine hours earlier now appeared as potential grounds for malpractice claims. Aiden Garrison, who had been watching from the back of the room beside several classmates, approached River's table with the hesitant steps of someone whose worldview had just been restructured. His earlier mockery now seemed not just cruel but dangerously naive. "River," he said, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." River studied the boy who had tormented her for months, noting the genuine shock in his expression. "You didn't want to know?" she replied, her response carrying neither anger nor forgiveness. "There's a difference." Patricia observed the exchange with the tactical assessment she applied to all interpersonal dynamics that might affect her daughter's well-being. "River, accepting apologies is a choice, not an obligation. Some people earn forgiveness, others just demand it." The distinction resonated throughout the community center as townspeople began to process their own roles in River's ordeal. Some had actively participated in the mockery, others had remained silent while a 14-year-old girl faced institutional harassment. The difference between malicious intent and passive complicity was about to become very important. Stella Davis pushed through the crowd to reach her best friend, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed River's vindication. "I never doubted you," she said fiercely, wrapping River in a hug that conveyed years of loyal friendship. "Not even when everyone else said you were making it up." "I know," River replied, returning the embrace with grateful intensity. "You kept me sane when I started questioning myself." Mrs. Jimenez approached the Hayes family with the careful respect of someone who understood military hierarchy and classified service. "Commander Hayes, I want to apologize personally. River's essay deserved recognition, not psychiatric evaluation." "You defended her when it mattered," Patricia replied, acknowledging the English teacher's support during the hearing. "That takes courage in a community that had already made up its mind." Coach Guerrero joined the conversation, his Marine background providing common ground with Patricia's naval service. "Ma'am, River's been training at the lake. Her water survival skills are exceptional for her age." "She learned from the best instructor available," Patricia said with maternal pride, "though I'm hoping she chooses academic pursuits over special operations." "What if I don't?" River asked, the question emerging from months of wondering whether her mother's path might also be her destiny. Patricia's expression grew serious as she considered her daughter's question. "Then you'll do it with full knowledge of the costs," she said finally. "But first, you'll finish high school without having your character questioned by civilians who mistake heroism for abandonment." The pointed comment drew uncomfortable glances from Principal Garrison and Dr. Sheffield, both of whom were beginning to understand that their actions would have consequences extending far beyond their initial intentions. Sheriff Stone approached the group with the measured steps of someone delivering official information. "Commander Hayes, I've been in contact with federal authorities. There will be an investigation into the handling of this matter." "What kind of investigation?" Principal Garrison asked, her voice revealing the panic she had been trying to suppress. "The kind that determines whether educational administrators violated federal protocols regarding military families," Agent Cooper explained with bureaucratic precision. "The kind that evaluates whether psychological professionals exceeded their authority in diagnosing family members of classified personnel." The implications settled over the school officials like a suffocating blanket. What had begun as routine administrative action was now a federal case involving potential violations of military family protection statutes that they hadn't known existed. Master Chief Hayes finally moved from his position behind River's chair, his presence drawing attention from everyone in the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding respect in military environments, "my family has endured months of suspicion and harassment because some of you chose to believe the worst rather than extend basic trust to a child." The crowd shifted uncomfortably as the old soldier continued his assessment. "Some of you owe apologies, others owe explanations. All of you owe my granddaughter the respect she should have received from the beginning." Reverend Preston stood again, his clerical authority providing moral framework for community reckoning. "Michael's right. We failed River when she needed our support. We chose gossip over faith, suspicion over trust." "What happens now?" someone called from the crowd. Agent Cooper consulted his official documentation before responding. "Now we begin the process of accountability. Educational administrators who exceeded their authority will face federal review. Psychological professionals who made diagnoses without proper protocols will be investigated by their licensing boards." Dr. Sheffield's face went white as she processed the implications of federal and professional oversight. Her confident diagnosis of River's mental state was about to become evidence in investigations that could end her career. "Commander Hayes," Judge Hartwell addressed Patricia directly, "what would you like to see happen regarding your daughter's education?" Patricia considered the question with the same tactical analysis she applied to operational planning. "I want my daughter to attend school without being treated like a case study. I want her teachers to focus on education rather than psychological evaluation. I want her classmates to understand that military families make sacrifices that civilian families don't face." "That seems reasonable," Judge Hartwell acknowledged. "Principal Garrison, how do you plan to ensure Miss Hayes receives appropriate educational support?" Principal Garrison struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further damage her professional standing. "We'll certainly review our procedures for addressing student claims about family circumstances." "You'll do more than review," Agent Cooper interjected. "You'll implement federal guidelines for educational institutions serving military families. You'll receive training on classification protocols and military family dynamics. You'll establish procedures that protect rather than persecute children whose parents serve in sensitive roles." The federal oversight that Principal Garrison had never imagined was now becoming mandatory professional development. Her administrative authority was being restructured according to standards she hadn't known existed. Patricia turned to address the crowd directly, her command presence focusing attention on information that needed to be understood. "Ladies and gentlemen, my daughter spent years carrying secrets she couldn't share. She defended our family's honor when sharing those secrets would have ended my career and compromised national security operations." The crowd listened with the uncomfortable attention of people learning about complexities they had never considered. Military classification requirements were abstract concepts until they watched a family whose lives had been shaped by operational necessity. "How many more families like yours are there?" Mrs. Jimenez asked, her teacher's curiosity focused on understanding rather than judgment. "More than you might expect," Patricia replied carefully. "Fewer than military necessity requires. Every family serving in classified roles faces the choice between operational security and public understanding." River looked up at her mother, finally able to ask questions that had haunted her childhood. "Mom, were you scared? During the missions?" Patricia considered her daughter's question with the honesty that their relationship deserved. "Terrified," she admitted. "Not of the operations, but of never coming home to you. Every mission carried the risk that you might grow up without knowing why I wasn't there." The admission revealed vulnerability that combat-hardened operators rarely displayed in public. But Patricia Hayes was no longer just Commander Blaze Hayes. She was a mother whose daughter needed to understand that courage and fear often occupied the same space. Outside the community center, the helicopters had departed, leaving only the afternoon silence of rural Montana. But inside, a family was beginning the complex process of rebuilding relationships that classification requirements had forced into shadow. And a community was learning that some truths are worth the patience required to understand them. 3 weeks after the hearing, Willow Creek had settled into an uncomfortable new normal. The Hayes family ranch, once isolated by suspicion and secrecy, now hosted a steady stream of visitors as community members struggled to process their collective misjudgment. Patricia had established clear boundaries about which questions she would answer and which remained classified, but her visible presence had transformed River's daily experience from social exile to cautious acceptance. River sat at the kitchen table working through calculus problems while Patricia reviewed training manuals for her new position at Naval Special Warfare Center. The domestic scene felt surreal after years of separation, but both mother and daughter were learning to navigate shared space without the constant tension of anticipated departure. "This derivative problem is impossible," River announced, pushing her textbook away with frustrated finality. "Show me," Patricia said, setting aside her military documentation to focus on civilian mathematics. Her transition from classified operations to teenage homework supervision required skills no military training had provided. River pointed to the complex equation with obvious irritation. "Mrs. Jimenez says we need to understand the practical applications, but when will I ever need to calculate the rate of change for some theoretical function?" "Navigation systems," Patricia replied automatically, then caught herself. "Though you probably shouldn't mention that in your answer." The casual reference to classified applications hung between them like smoke, a reminder that normal family conversations would always carry undertones of operational security. River had grown accustomed to her mother's careful editing of technical knowledge that civilian education couldn't officially acknowledge. Master Chief Hayes entered the kitchen carrying morning mail that included several official envelopes with federal seals. "Patricia, your new orders came through." "River, you have 3 college recruitment letters." "College already?" River asked, surprised by the timeline. "Your story has attracted attention from academic institutions that specialize in children of military families," Master Chief Hayes explained, sorting the correspondence with practiced efficiency. "Apparently, writing an essay that triggers federal investigation demonstrates intellectual courage that admissions committees find compelling." Patricia examined her orders with professional focus, noting details that would determine their family's stability for the foreseeable future. Permanent assignment to Coronado Training Command, she announced with satisfaction. No deployment requirements. No classification restrictions beyond standard operational security. The normalcy implied by permanent assignment felt revolutionary after years of uncertainty. River had learned not to plan beyond her mother's next communication window, but permanent assignment suggested that birthday parties and school events might finally include both parents who were cleared to attend. A knock at the front door interrupted their domestic planning. Through the window, they could see Dr. Sheffield's car in the driveway, though her posture as she approached the house suggested official business rather than social courtesy. Master Chief Hayes answered the door with the formal politeness he reserved for civilians whose motivations remained unclear. Dr. Sheffield. Mr. Hayes, I'm here to speak with Commander Hayes and River about educational transition planning, the psychologist announced, her professional confidence noticeably diminished since the hearing. Patricia joined her father at the door, her command presence automatically asserting itself when faced with the woman who had attempted to diagnose her daughter with mental illness. Dr. Sheffield, I wasn't expecting a house call. Federal oversight requires comprehensive review of River's educational experience, Dr. Sheffield explained, consulting her clipboard with the nervous precision of someone operating under unwelcome supervision. I'm here to discuss remediation strategies. Remediation for what? River asked, joining the conversation with the direct approach that had characterized her throughout the crisis. Dr. Sheffield's professional composure wavered slightly as she faced the teenager whose psychological evaluation had become the center of a federal investigation. To address any academic or social impacts from the recent misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Patricia repeated, her voice carrying the dangerous edge that had once been directed at enemy combatants who underestimated American resolve. You diagnosed my daughter with delusional thinking because she told the truth about her family. I made my assessment based on available information, Dr. Sheffield defended, though her voice lacked the confidence she had displayed during the hearing. Standard protocols require. Standard protocols for military families are different from civilian populations, Agent Cooper interrupted, approaching from his government sedan that had appeared in the driveway without being heard. Which is why federal oversight now includes specialized training for educational professionals. Dr. Sheffield's face went pale as she processed the implications of continued federal monitoring. Her evaluation of River had triggered institutional changes that would affect her professional practice for years to come. Agent Cooper, Patricia acknowledged with the courtesy reserved for federal personnel whose authority she respected. What kind of specialized training? Military family educational protocols, Agent Cooper explained, producing an official binder that was clearly designed for professional development. Mandatory certification for all educational and psychological personnel serving communities with classified military families. The binder's thickness suggested comprehensive training that would fundamentally alter how civilians approached military family dynamics. Dr. Sheffield accepted it, with the reluctant recognition that her career now required expertise she had never considered necessary. When does this training begin? Dr. Sheffield asked, her professional curiosity struggling with personal embarrassment. Next week, Agent Cooper replied, along with continuing federal oversight of River's educational experience to ensure compliance with military family protection protocols. River watched the adults negotiate her future with the strange mixture of vindication and exhaustion that accompanied institutional validation. Months of fighting for credibility had ended with federal oversight of her education, but the victory felt complicated by the attention it attracted. I just want to finish high school without being treated like a case study, River said, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had become unwillingly famous for surviving institutional harassment. That's exactly what these protocols are designed to ensure, Agent Cooper assured her. No student should face psychological evaluation because their parent's service record is classified. Coach Guerrero's pickup truck pulled into the driveway, followed by Mrs. Jimenez's hybrid car. The PE teacher and English teacher had requested this meeting to discuss River's athletic and academic integration after weeks of community upheaval. River, Coach Guerrero called as he approached the house. Your swim times at the lake have caught attention from college recruiters. Several Division I programs are interested in your water survival techniques. College recruiters? River asked, surprised by the timeline. Turns out that combat water survival translates well to competitive swimming, Mrs. Jimenez added, joining the conversation. Though the techniques your mother taught you are considerably more advanced than standard athletic training. Patricia considered the implications of her daughter's specialized skills attracting academic attention. River, if you're interested in competitive swimming, we can discuss proper training that doesn't compromise operational security. The distinction between classified training and civilian athletics was another adjustment that military families navigated daily. River's skills were legitimate achievements, but their origins required careful editing for public consumption. What about the essay? River asked Mrs. Jimenez. The one that started all this trouble? The one that's being published in a military family anthology, Mrs. Jimenez replied with obvious pride. Your experience is helping other families understand the complexities of classified service. The transformation of River's school assignment into published advocacy felt surreal. What had begun as teenage homework had become documentation of institutional bias that would educate civilian communities about military family experiences. Dr. Sheffield cleared her throat, drawing attention back to her official responsibilities. River, as part of the remediation process, I need to ask about your adjustment to having your mother home permanently. River studied the psychologist who had spent weeks questioning her mental health, now required to evaluate her family's successful reunion. It's complicated, she said finally. Good, complicated, but still complicated. How so? Dr. Sheffield asked, her clinical training focusing on psychological dynamics she hadn't understood weeks earlier. 15 years of operational security don't disappear overnight, Patricia interjected, her professional assessment acknowledging challenges that civilian psychology textbooks didn't address. Military families develop communication patterns that require adjustment when classification requirements change. The insight revealed complexities that Dr. Sheffield's original evaluation had completely missed. Military families operated according to security protocols that civilian psychology had never been trained to recognize or support. For example, Dr. Sheffield asked, her professional curiosity now focused on learning rather than diagnosing. I still wake up listening for helicopters, River admitted. Mom still checks perimeter security before bed. We both edit our conversations automatically, even when classification isn't required anymore. The behavioral patterns that military life had created would require time and patience to modify. Dr. Sheffield began taking notes with the recognition that her future professional development would need to address dynamics she had never considered. Sheriff Stone's patrol car joined the growing collection of vehicles in the Hayes driveway. His arrival suggested official business related to the ongoing federal investigation into educational protocols and institutional accountability. Commander Hayes. Sheriff Stone addressed Patricia with the formal respect that military rank required. Principal Garrison has submitted her resignation. The school board is requesting federal guidance on replacement procedures. The news that Principal Garrison had resigned was not unexpected, but it represented institutional acknowledgement that River's treatment had been unacceptable. Her departure would allow new leadership that understood military family dynamics. What about continuity for River's education? Patricia asked, her maternal concern focusing on practical implications rather than political satisfaction. Interim administration has been briefed on military family protocols, Sheriff Stone assured her. Federal oversight continues until permanent leadership demonstrates appropriate competency. The institutional changes triggered by River's experience would affect military families throughout the district. Her individual struggle had created systematic reforms that would protect other children whose parents served in classified roles. Master Chief Hayes observed the gathering of officials and educators with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic planning had achieved its objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, my granddaughter's courage has created changes that will benefit military families for generations. The old soldier's assessment carried weight that none of the civilians could challenge. River's refusal to accept institutional dismissal had triggered federal oversight that would fundamentally alter how educational systems approached military family dynamics. What happens next? River asked, her question addressing both immediate practical concerns and longer-term family planning. Next, we learn how to be a normal family, Patricia replied, her voice carrying both hope and uncertainty, whatever that means for people like us. The question of normalcy would challenge all of them as they navigated relationships that classification requirements had forced into unconventional patterns, but for the first time in years, they had the opportunity to discover what normal might look like for the Hayes family. Outside, the Montana afternoon stretched endlessly blue above mountains that had witnessed their struggle and would now observe their healing. The truth, once revealed, had changed everything. Now came the harder work of rebuilding trust, relationships, and hope. 2 months after the hearing, River Hayes found herself in the unlikely position of being interviewed by Georgetown University's admissions committee via video conference from the Willow Creek Public Library. The irony was not lost on her that the same institution where she had been publicly humiliated now hosted her discussion with one of the nation's most prestigious political science programs. Ms. Hayes, Dean Catherine Morrison addressed her through the laptop screen. "Your essay about military-family dynamics has generated significant academic interest. Can you discuss how your experience might contribute to Georgetown's International Security Studies program?" River glanced toward the library's back corner, where Patricia sat reading, close enough to provide moral support but far enough away to avoid appearing on camera. Her mother's presence had become a source of strength rather than anxiety, though River was learning to navigate independence while maintaining family connection. "Living with classification requirements taught me that truth exists in layers," River replied, her confidence strengthened by months of defending her family's reality. "Academic study of international security needs to account for families who sacrifice normalcy for national defense. It's a perspective that textbooks can't provide." Dean Morrison's eyebrows rose with obvious interest. "How would you apply that perspective to policy analysis?" "By remembering that every classified operation affects real families with real children who grow up carrying secrets they can't share," River answered, her voice carrying conviction earned through personal experience. "Policymakers need to understand those human costs when they authorize operations that require families to live in shadow." After the interview concluded, River closed the laptop and joined her mother in the library's quiet corner. Patricia looked up from her professional development materials with the mixture of pride and concern that had characterized her adjustment to permanent family life. "How did it feel?" Patricia asked, setting aside her reading about civilian educational psychology. "Weird," River admitted. 6 months ago, I was being diagnosed with mental illness for writing about you. Now universities want to hear my thoughts on military family policy." "That's growth," Patricia observed, "personal and institutional." River settled into the chair beside her mother, noting how natural their casual proximity had become after years of separation and reunion anxiety. "Mom, what if I choose Georgetown and hate political science? What if I'm only interesting to them because of what happened to us?" Patricia considered her daughter's concerns with the same tactical analysis she applied to operational planning. "River, adversity reveals character. It doesn't create it. You've shown courage, intelligence, and integrity under pressure. Those qualities will serve you regardless of your academic focus." "But what if I want to follow your path instead?" River asked, voicing the question that had haunted her since learning the truth about her mother's career. "What if civilian life feels too safe after growing up around classified operations?" The question revealed complexities that Patricia had been dreading since her declassifications. Military service ran in families for reasons that extended beyond tradition into the realm of psychological compatibility with high-stakes environments. "If you choose military service, you'll do it with full understanding of the costs," Patricia replied carefully. "But you'll also have options I never had. Women in special operations aren't experimental anymore. The path exists because people like us proved it was possible." Mrs. Jimenez approached their table with the careful respect she had developed for private family conversations. "River, I don't want to interrupt, but there's someone here who's been hoping to speak with you." River looked toward the library entrance, where Aiden Garrison stood with obvious nervousness, his usual swagger replaced by the uncomfortable posture of someone seeking forgiveness for behavior he finally understood was wrong. "What does he want?" River asked, her tone neutral rather than hostile. "To apologize properly," Mrs. Jimenez replied. "He's been asking for weeks, but I told him you'd talk when you were ready." River studied the boy who had tormented her for months, noting how different he appeared without the protection of his father's authority. Principal Garrison's resignation had affected her entire family, forcing them to confront the consequences of institutional arrogance. 5 minutes, River decided. "But Mom stays." Mrs. Jimenez gestured for Aiden to approach, then diplomatically retreated to provide privacy while maintaining supervisory presence. The teenager crossed the library with reluctant steps, clearly uncomfortable with the reversal of social dynamics. "River," Aiden began, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I wanted to apologize for what I said about your mom, about your family." River waited for him to continue, offering neither encouragement nor absolution. "I was jealous," Aiden admitted, the confession clearly difficult for someone accustomed to social dominance. "Your stories about your mom were so much cooler than anything my family did. It was easier to call you a liar than admit I wished my dad was as brave as your mom." The insight revealed psychological dynamics that River hadn't considered. Aiden's mockery had stemmed from insecurity rather than malice, though the distinction didn't excuse months of harassment. "Your dad lost his job because of how he treated me," River observed, her words carrying implications rather than accusations. "He deserved it," Aiden replied, surprising River with his directness. "What happened to you was wrong. What he did to your family was worse." Patricia listened to the exchange with professional assessment, noting the teenager's genuine remorse while remaining alert for manipulation or insincerity. Her experience with interrogation had made her skilled at reading human motivations. "What do you want from me?" River asked bluntly. "I want to understand how you stayed strong when everyone was against you," Aiden said, his question revealing vulnerability that contrasted sharply with his previous arrogance. "I want to know how to be brave like that." The request for guidance from someone who had caused her pain felt surreal, but River recognized the sincerity in his voice. "You start by telling the truth even when it's inconvenient," she said finally. "You defend people who can't defend themselves. You choose courage over comfort." Aiden nodded with the attention of someone receiving instruction he desperately needed. "Would it be okay if I wrote you a letter, a real apology?" "You just gave me a real apology," River replied. "But if writing helps you process what happened, then write." After Aiden departed, Patricia observed her daughter with obvious admiration. "That was generous of you." "It was necessary," River corrected. "Carrying anger takes energy I need for other things." The maturity in River's response revealed growth that months of adversity had accelerated. She was developing emotional intelligence that would serve her regardless of whether she chose civilian or military paths. Coach Guerrero entered the library carrying a folder, thick with college recruitment materials. His coaching responsibilities had expanded since River's swimming abilities had attracted national attention from programs that specialized in athletes with military family backgrounds. "River, I have updates from 3 Division I programs," he announced, settling at their table with obvious excitement. "Stanford, Navy, and Duke are all offering full scholarships based on your water survival demonstrations." "Navy wants to recruit me?" River asked, surprised by the symmetry. "They're impressed by your technical skills and family background," Coach Guerrero explained. "But they want you to compete in standard swimming events, not demonstrate combat techniques." The distinction between military and civilian applications of her abilities was another boundary that River would need to navigate carefully. Her skills were legitimate athletic achievements, but their origins required diplomatic editing. "What about academics?" Patricia asked, her maternal concern focusing on educational rather than athletic opportunities. "All 3 programs offer strong political science departments with national security specializations," Coach Guerrero assured her. River wouldn't have to choose between athletics and academic interests. River studied the recruitment materials with growing awareness of how dramatically her options had expanded. 6 months earlier, she had been facing psychological evaluation and alternative education placement. Now she was choosing between full scholarships at elite institutions. "Mom, what would you choose?" River asked. Patricia considered the question with careful attention to her daughter's autonomy rather than her own preferences. "I'd choose the program that challenges you intellectually while supporting your personal growth. Athletic success is temporary. Character development lasts forever." Agent Cooper entered the library with the measured steps of someone conducting routine follow-up rather than crisis intervention. His presence had become a regular feature of River's life as federal oversight continued to monitor her educational experience and institutional compliance. "River, how are you adjusting to the new normal?" Agent Cooper asked, settling into an available chair with professional courtesy. "It's still weird being famous for surviving something that shouldn't have happened," River replied honestly. "But I'm learning to use the attention for positive purposes." "Such as?" "Mrs. Jimenez and I are developing curriculum about military families for civilian schools," River explained, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who had found meaningful purpose in painful experience. "We want to prevent other kids from facing what I went through." Agent Cooper's expression showed approval for the educational initiative. That's exactly the kind of systematic change that federal oversight was designed to encourage. Personal experience informing institutional improvement. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Chief Hayes, whose presence at the library suggested family business rather than casual social interaction. He approached their group with the purposeful stride of someone delivering important information. "Patricia, River, we need to discuss the Pentagon's invitation," he announced, producing an official envelope that clearly contained significant correspondence. "What invitation?" River asked, noting her mother's sudden attention to the document. Master Chief Hayes extracted the letter with careful movements that suggested its contents were both important and sensitive. "The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with our family. Apparently, your experience has influenced policy discussions about military family support systems." The implications of Pentagon-level attention felt overwhelming to River, whose struggle had been deeply personal rather than political. But she was learning that individual experiences often became catalysts for institutional change. "When?" Patricia asked, her professional training focusing on logistical requirements rather than emotional impact. "Next month," Master Chief Hayes replied, "full family trip to Washington, D.C. Federal transportation, security, and accommodation provided." River processed the idea of discussing her experience with the nation's highest military leadership. The girl who had been mocked for claiming her mother was a SEAL would now advise the Pentagon on military family policy. "What would they want from me?" River asked. "Your perspective," Agent Cooper interjected. "Military leadership needs to understand how classification requirements affect families. Your experience provides insight that operational analysis can't capture." The transformation of River's personal struggle into national policy influence felt both empowering and daunting. She was learning that individual courage could create changes that affected thousands of families facing similar challenges. "I'll do it," River decided, her voice carrying the confidence that had sustained her through months of institutional skepticism. "But I want to include other military kids in the discussion. This isn't just about our family." Patricia smiled with maternal pride as her daughter demonstrated the leadership qualities that military service had taught her to recognize and value. River was developing into exactly the kind of person that democracy needed, someone willing to fight for truth, even when fighting was difficult. Outside the library windows, November snow was beginning to fall across the Mission Mountains, covering Willow Creek in the clean, white silence that promised renewal and fresh beginnings. Inside, a family was planning their next chapter in a story that had already changed more lives than they had ever imagined possible. The Pentagon's corridors carried an institutional weight that River had never experienced, even during her most challenging moments at Willow Creek. Walking beside Patricia and Master Chief Hayes through hallways lined with portraits of military leaders, she felt the gravity of national security decisions that affected families like hers every day. Their escort, a young Marine captain, maintained respectful silence as they approached the Secretary of Defense's conference room. "Are you nervous?" Patricia asked quietly, noting the tension in her daughter's posture. "Terrified," River admitted, adjusting the navy blue blazer that Mrs. Jimenez had helped her select for the occasion. 6 months ago, I couldn't get adults in Willow Creek to believe me. Now I'm supposed to advise the Pentagon?" "You're not advising," Master Chief Hayes corrected gently. "You're sharing your truth. Let them figure out how to apply it." The conference room doors opened to reveal a gathering that represented the highest levels of military leadership. Secretary of Defense Amanda Richardson sat at the head of an oval table surrounded by service chiefs, policy advisors, and federal officials whose combined experience encompassed decades of national security operations. Agent Cooper nodded from his position near the wall, his presence providing familiar anchor in an environment designed to intimidate. "Miss Hayes," Secretary Richardson addressed River directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of lives. "Thank you for agreeing to share your experience with us." River took her assigned seat, noting how the adult attention felt different from the hostility she had faced during the community center hearing. These were professionals seeking information rather than entertainment, though the stakes felt considerably higher. "Your family's situation has highlighted gaps in our support systems for classified personnel," Secretary Richardson continued. "We need to understand how policy decisions at this level affect children and families at the community level." General Patricia Hawkins, Army Chief of Staff, leaned forward with obvious interest. River, can you describe what it was like growing up with a parent in classified operations? River considered the question carefully, recognizing that her answer would influence policies affecting thousands of military families. It was like living in two worlds, she said finally. At home, I knew my mom was serving our country in important ways. At school, I had to pretend she was just absent for no reason. How did that dual existence affect your social development? Asked Dr. Michael Santos, a civilian advisor specializing in military family psychology. I learned to edit everything I said, River replied, her voice gaining confidence as she found her rhythm. I learned to carry secrets that isolated me from my peers. I learned that telling the truth about my family could be dangerous, even when that truth was something to be proud of. Admiral Sarah Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, studied River with professional assessment. Your essay mentions specific training your mother provided. Can you describe how those skills affected your peer relationships? River glanced at Patricia, who nodded permission to discuss previously classified information. I could swim farther and hold my breath longer than other kids my age. I knew knots and navigation techniques that seemed excessive for recreational activities. I understood tactical concepts that my teachers didn't recognize. Did these abilities create social advantages or disadvantages? Dr. Santos pressed. Both, River answered honestly. They made me useful in emergency situations, but they also made me different in ways I couldn't explain. Other kids thought I was showing off when I was just using skills my mom had taught me for survival. Secretary Richardson made notes. As River spoke, her attention focused on policy implications rather than personal drama. River, what would have made your experience easier? The question struck at the heart of what River had been thinking about for months. If my teachers had understood that some military families operate under different rules, she said. If there had been protocols for supporting kids whose parents serve in classified roles. If telling the truth about military service had been celebrated instead of questioned. Specifically, General Hawkins prompted. Training for educators about military family dynamics. River elaborated, her voice growing stronger as she outlined solutions she had been developing with Mrs. Jimenez. Clear procedures for supporting students whose parents' service can't be discussed publicly. Protection from psychological evaluation when kids accurately describe classified family realities. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, representing Military Family Services, took detailed notes as River spoke. What about peer education? How do we help civilian communities understand military family sacrifices without compromising operational security? River considered the balance between transparency and security that had defined her entire childhood. Age-appropriate education about military service that acknowledges classification without revealing specifics, she suggested. Community programs that teach civilians about military family challenges. Support groups for kids whose parents serve in sensitive roles. You've thought about this extensively, Secretary Richardson observed with obvious approval. I've lived it extensively, River corrected. And I've met other military kids through the curriculum we're developing. The problems I faced aren't unique to my family. Patricia spoke for the first time since introductions, her command presence adding weight to the discussion. Mr. Secretary, River's experience represents systematic failure to support classified personnel families. The emotional cost to our children affects operational readiness and retention. Explain, Admiral Chen requested. Operators who worry about their families' social welfare carry that stress into mission environments, Patricia continued. Children who face social isolation because of their parents' service may reject military careers, reducing our talent pipeline. Community hostility toward military families affects recruitment in areas where we need civilian support. The policy implications rippled through the room as senior leaders processed connections between individual family experiences and national security requirements. River watched generals and admirals recognize that strategic planning needed to account for 14-year-old girls facing psychological evaluation for writing truthful essays. River, Secretary Richardson addressed her again. If you could change one thing about how military families are supported, what would it be? River had been preparing for this question since receiving the invitation. Recognition that military service affects entire families, not just the person wearing the uniform, she said. When someone accepts classified assignments, their children make sacrifices too. Those sacrifices deserve support, not suspicion. General Hawkins consulted her notes before responding. We're considering mandatory military family education for all Department of Defense personnel working with civilian communities. Would that address your concerns? It's a start, River replied diplomatically, but it needs to extend beyond military personnel to civilian educators, mental health professionals, and community leaders who interact with military families. Dr. Santos leaned forward with obvious interest. You're recommending systematic civilian education about military family dynamics. I'm recommending that people like Dr. Sheffield receive training before they evaluate military kids, River said, her voice carrying the edge that developed when she discussed institutional failures. I'm recommending that school administrators understand classification protocols before they question family truthfulness. The reference to her specific experience brought uncomfortable silence as senior leaders processed the implications of civilian incompetence affecting military family welfare. Agent Cooper spoke from his position near the wall, his federal authority adding weight to River's recommendations. The Hayes family situation triggered policy review at multiple federal agencies. He announced, Department of Education is developing protocols for supporting military students. Health and Human Services is revising guidelines for psychological evaluation of military family members. Justice is reviewing civil rights protections for classified personnel families. The scope of institutional change stemming from River's individual experience felt overwhelming, but she was learning that personal courage often catalyzed systematic reform. Her refusal to accept institutional harassment had created ripple effects reaching the highest levels of government. River, Secretary Richardson said, consulting documents that clearly contained policy recommendations, would you be interested in participating in ongoing military family advocacy? Your perspective could inform long-term policy development. The invitation to influence national policy felt surreal for someone who had been facing alternative education placement months earlier. What kind of participation? River asked. Advisory Committee for Military Family Support Services, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison explained. Quarterly meetings with policymakers, annual review of support programs, input on resource allocation for family assistance initiatives. River glanced at her mother and grandfather, noting their expressions of pride mixed with concern about ongoing public attention. Would this interfere with college plans? It would enhance them, Admiral Chen replied. Universities value students with policy experience, especially in national security fields. Your advisory committee service would demonstrate applied learning that classroom study can't provide. The opportunity to influence policy while pursuing education felt like the perfect synthesis of River's experiences and interests. She was developing into exactly the kind of citizen that democratic society needed, someone willing to transform personal adversity into systematic improvement. I'll do it, River decided, her voice carrying the confidence that months of defending her family's truth had developed. But I want other military kids involved too. This can't just be about my experience. Secretary Richardson smiled with obvious approval. Ms. Hayes, that's exactly the kind of thinking that effective policy requires. Personal experience informing systematic change, individual courage creating institutional improvement. Master Chief Hayes spoke for the first time during the formal session, his decades of military service providing context for his granddaughter's achievement. Mr. Secretary, River represents the best of military family values, courage under pressure, loyalty to truth, service to others despite personal cost. She represents the future of military family advocacy, Secretary Richardson replied. Young people who understand both the necessity of national security and the human cost of serving that necessity. The formal session concluded with commitments to ongoing collaboration and systematic policy reform. As they prepared to leave, River felt the weight of responsibility for representing military families whose voices had been silenced by classification requirements. Walking through the Pentagon's corridors toward their departure, Patricia reflected on how dramatically their family's situation had evolved. River, are you comfortable with this level of public responsibility? I'm comfortable with using my experience to help other families, River replied. If going through what we went through prevents other kids from facing the same problems, then it was worth it. The maturity in her response revealed growth that adversity had accelerated. River was developing emotional intelligence and civic commitment that would serve her regardless of which career path she ultimately chose. Outside the Pentagon, Agent Cooper approached them with final procedural information. River, your first advisory committee meeting is scheduled for next month. You'll receive briefing materials and security clearance documentation. Security clearance? River asked, surprised by the implication. Advisory committee members need access to classified family support information, Agent Cooper explained. Your clearance will be limited to family welfare policies, nothing operational. The irony was not lost on any of them that River, who had faced psychological evaluation for knowing classified information, was now being granted official access to classified policy development. Her journey from suspected mental illness to federal advisory committee member represented vindication that extended far beyond personal satisfaction. As their government transportation carried them back toward Montana, River watched the Washington landscape pass by and considered how much her life had changed since writing an essay about her mother's mysterious career. The girl who had been mocked for claiming her mother was a SEAL was now advising the Pentagon on military family policy. But more importantly, she was learning that individual courage could create changes that affected thousands of families facing similar challenges. Her story was becoming a catalyst for systematic reform that would protect military children for generations to come. Spring arrived early in Willow Creek, bringing with it the kind of crystalline Montana mornings that made even difficult decisions feel manageable. River Hayes stood at her bedroom window watching Master Chief Hayes tend to the vegetable garden that had become his retirement project, noting how the repetitive motions of planting seemed to provide him the same meditative focus that weapons maintenance had once offered. 8 months had passed since the community center hearing, and the transformation in both her family and her town felt complete, yet fragile, like ice that had reformed but might crack under unexpected pressure. River's acceptance letters from Georgetown, Stanford, and Naval Academy lay spread across her desk, each representing a different vision of her future that she needed to reconcile with the young woman she had become. Still weighing options? Patricia asked from the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing civilian clothes that she still seemed surprised to find in her closet each morning. Still terrified of choosing wrong, River admitted, accepting the coffee with grateful hands. What if I pick Georgetown and realize I belong at Navy? What if I choose Stanford and miss opportunities at Georgetown? Patricia settled on the edge of River's bed, her presence carrying the comfortable authority that months of permanent family life had established. What if you trust that any choice you make will be the right one because you'll bring your character to whatever environment you enter? The wisdom felt too simple for such a complex decision, but River was learning that her mother's operational experience had taught her to cut through analysis paralysis with decisive action based on available information. The advisory committee meeting next week might help, River mused, referring to her ongoing federal appointment that had become a regular part of her life. Seeing how policy gets implemented could influence whether I want to study it academically or practice it professionally. A knock at the front door interrupted their morning planning session. Through the window, River could see a news van in their driveway, followed by a sedan that she recognized as belonging to Judge Francis Hartwell. The combination suggested official business rather than media intrusion, though River had learned to be cautious about both. "Were you expecting visitors?" Patricia asked, her tactical instincts automatically assessing potential complications. Judge Hartwell mentioned wanting to discuss the documentary project. River replied, remembering a conversation from the previous week about a filmmaker interested in military family experiences. They descended the stairs to find Master Chief Hayes welcoming Judge Hartwell and a woman River didn't recognize. The stranger carried herself with the professional confidence of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions, though her expression suggested genuine interest rather than sensational exploitation. "River, this is Sarah Martinez from PBS NewsHour," Judge Hartwell explained. "She's working on a documentary about military family policy reform and the role individual courage can play in systematic change." Sarah Martinez approached with respectful directness. "Ms. Hayes, your experience has influenced federal policy in ways that affect thousands of military families. Would you be willing to discuss how personal adversity can create institutional improvement?" River studied the journalist's face, looking for signs of sensationalism or exploitation. Finding none, she gestured toward the living room with the hospitality that Master Chief Hayes had taught her was always appropriate when dealing with people who showed proper respect. "What kind of documentary?" River asked as they settled into comfortable chairs. "Educational programming about civilian-military community relations," Sir explained, consulting notes that suggested extensive preparation rather than casual interest. "Your story illustrates how misunderstanding military family dynamics can create unnecessary conflict and how proper education can prevent institutional bias." Patricia joined the conversation from her position near the fireplace, her presence adding military perspective to civilian journalism. "What's your background with military families?" "My husband served 2 tours with Marine Force Recon," Sarah replied, understanding the importance of establishing credibility with military families. "I've seen how classification requirements affect children and spouses. Your daughter's courage in defending family truth, despite institutional pressure, deserves broader recognition." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Jimenez and Coach Guerrero, both carrying materials related to the military family curriculum they had been developing with River's input. Their timing suggested coordination rather than coincidence, though River had grown accustomed to adults organizing around her schedule without necessarily informing her of their planning. "River," Mrs. Jimenez announced with obvious excitement, "the Department of Education has approved our curriculum for national distribution. Military family education will be mandatory in all schools serving military communities." The news that their work had achieved federal approval felt both vindicating and overwhelming. River's individual struggle had created educational resources that would protect military children across the country from facing similar institutional bias. "How many schools will implement the curriculum?" Sarah Martinez asked, her journalistic instincts recognizing a significant policy development. "Over 3,000 schools in districts with significant military populations," Coach Guerrero replied, consulting documents that showed the scope of their achievement. "Plus voluntary adoption in civilian districts that want to improve their support for military families." River processed the numbers with growing understanding of how her personal experience had influenced institutional change. 3,000 schools meant hundreds of thousands of military children would receive better support because she had refused to accept being dismissed as delusional. "This deserves documentation," Sarah Martinez observed, her professional assessment recognizing the educational and historical significance of their accomplishment. "Would you consider allowing cameras during your next advisory committee meeting? The public needs to understand how policy gets developed and implemented." The request for media access to federal policy meetings felt intimidating, but River was learning that transparency could protect against future institutional failures. "I'd need federal approval," she said carefully, "and I'd want to focus on policy content rather than personal drama." "Agreed," Sarah replied promptly. "This would be educational programming, not entertainment television." Judge Hartwell leaned forward with obvious interest. "River, there's something else we need to discuss. The Montana State Bar Association wants to present you with their Citizen Advocacy Award." The legal recognition felt surreal for someone who had been facing psychological evaluation months earlier. "What kind of award?" "Annual recognition for civilians who demonstrate exceptional courage in defending constitutional principles," Judge Hartwell explained. "Your refusal to accept institutional bias despite personal cost exemplifies the kind of civic courage that democracy requires." River glanced at her mother, noting Patricia's expression of pride mixed with concern about continued public attention. Would accepting the award create more media scrutiny? "It would create positive recognition for military family advocacy," Judge Hartwell clarified. "But you're under no obligation to accept public honors for doing what you believed was right." The distinction between recognition and obligation was important to River, who had learned to navigate the difference between celebrating achievement and exploiting trauma for entertainment value. Stella Davis knocked once before entering through the kitchen door, a privilege earned through years of friendship that had deepened during River's most challenging months. She carried acceptance letters from the University of Montana and Montana State, adding local options to River's increasingly complex decision matrix. "In-state schools?" River asked, surprised by the additional choices. "Full scholarships plus research opportunities in military family psychology," Stella explained. "They want you to develop academic expertise in the field you've already influenced through policy work." The opportunity to study military family dynamics academically while continuing policy influence appealed to River's desire to understand systematic rather than just individual solutions to institutional problems. "Local programs would allow you to maintain family connections while pursuing educational goals," Patricia observed, her maternal perspective recognizing advantages that federal appointments and national recognition couldn't provide. "But they might limit exposure to diverse perspectives," Master Chief Hayes countered, his military experience valuing broad educational experiences over familiar comfort. River appreciated the family discussion about her future, though she recognized that the final decision needed to be hers alone. "I think I need to see how the documentary interview goes," she said finally. "Understanding how my story might help other families could influence whether I want to stay local or seek broader platforms." Sara Martinez's interview proved more substantive than River had expected. Rather than focusing on dramatic moments from the hearing, the journalist explored policy implications and institutional changes that River's experience had catalyzed. "Ms. Hayes," Sara asked, "what would you want viewers to understand about military family sacrifices?" River considered the question that had become central to her public advocacy. That serving in classified operations requires entire families to make sacrifices that civilian families don't face, she said. Children of military personnel carry secrets that isolate them from peers. They face questions about absent parents that they can't answer honestly without compromising national security. How should civilian communities respond to those challenges? With education instead of suspicion, River replied, her voice carrying conviction earned through personal experience. With support instead of psychological evaluation. With recognition that military families serve our country in ways that require different kinds of understanding. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering policy development, community education, and the ongoing Federal Advisory Committee work that had become a regular part of River's life. Sara Martinez demonstrated professional competence that made River comfortable with documentary participation. After the camera crew departed, River sat with her family on the front porch, watching the late afternoon light paint the Mission Mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded her why Montana would always feel like home regardless of where her education took her. "How do you feel about the documentary?" Patricia asked. "Good," River replied thoughtfully. "Like maybe our story can help other families avoid what we went through." "What about college?" Master Chief Hayes pressed gently. River studied her acceptance letters one more time, noting how each opportunity represented different aspects of her interests and experiences. "I think I know," she said finally. "But I want to sleep on it one more night." That evening, River video called Aiden Garrison, whose family had moved to Missoula after his father's resignation, but who had maintained contact as part of his ongoing effort to understand and atone for his previous behavior. "How's the college decision going?" Aiden asked, his voice carrying genuine interest rather than social obligation. "Complicated," River admitted. "Every choice feels like closing doors on other possibilities." "Maybe that's the point," Aiden suggested with insight that surprised River. "Maybe growing up means choosing one path while trusting that you'll find ways to explore other interests later." The conversation reminded River that personal growth often came from unexpected sources, including people who had once caused pain but had worked to become better versions of themselves. As spring darkness settled over Willow Creek, River finally made her decision. Standing at her bedroom window where months of difficult mornings had begun, she felt the quiet confidence that came from understanding her own values and trusting her instincts about the future. Tomorrow, she would call Georgetown University and accept their offer to study international security studies with a focus on military family policy. She would continue her advisory committee work while pursuing academic credentials that would enhance her ability to influence systematic change. But tonight, she was simply River Hayes. The girl who had defended her family's truth when doing so required more courage than any 14-year-old should need to possess. The girl who had learned that individual courage could create changes that affected thousands of other families facing similar challenges. Outside her window, Montana stretched endlessly toward horizons that held promise of adventure she couldn't yet imagine but felt prepared to meet with the character that adversity had tested and strengthened. 2 years later, River Hayes stood before the Georgetown University International Security Studies Symposium, her junior year research presentation drawing an audience that included professors, policymakers, and military family advocates from across the nation. The auditorium that had once seemed impossibly intimidating now felt like natural territory for someone who had learned to navigate complex institutional dynamics through necessity rather than academic theory. Military family policy reform requires understanding that classification creates unique psychological and social challenges, River addressed the gathering, her voice carrying the confidence that came from combining lived experience with rigorous academic study. Children of classified personnel develop coping mechanisms that civilian institutions often misinterpret as behavioral problems rather than adaptive responses to extraordinary circumstances. In the third row, Patricia Hayes sat beside Master Chief Hayes, both wearing civilian clothes but maintaining the military bearing that decades of service had ingrained in their posture. Patricia's transition to permanent training assignments at Coronado had allowed regular visits to Washington, where River's Federal Advisory Committee work continued to influence national policy development. Miss Hayes, Professor Janet Collins asked during the question period, "Your research suggests that current military family support systems remain inadequate despite recent reforms. What additional changes would you recommend?" River consulted her notes, though the recommendations had become second nature through years of advocacy work. Mandatory military family liaison positions in all school districts serving significant military populations, quote, she replied. Specialized training for mental health professionals who work with military families, community education programs that teach civilians about the unique challenges that classification requirements create for children and spouses. Dr. Amanda Sheffield, who was attending the symposium as part of her mandatory continuing education in military family psychology, raised her hand with obvious reluctance. Her professional rehabilitation following the Hayes family incident had required extensive retraining and federal oversight that continued to shape her practice. Miss Hayes, Dr. Sheffield said, her voice carrying the careful respect of someone whose professional credibility had been rebuilt through hard-earned competence. Your advocacy has created significant institutional changes. Do you believe current reforms adequately address the problems you experienced? River studied the woman who had once attempted to diagnose her with mental illness, noting how Dr. Sheffield's participation in military family education had transformed her from adversary to advocate. The reforms are comprehensive and necessary, River replied diplomatically, but institutional change requires ongoing vigilance. Military families need civilians who understand their unique circumstances, not just policies that mandate support. The distinction between regulatory compliance and genuine understanding was one that River had learned to emphasize through her policy work. Creating rules was easier than changing attitudes, but lasting reform required both structural changes and cultural transformation. After the presentation concluded, River was approached by Maria Santos, a high school senior from a military family in Colorado whose parents served in classified intelligence roles. The young woman carried herself with the guarded confidence that River recognized in military children who had learned to navigate civilian skepticism about their family realities. Miss Hayes, Maria said, her voice revealing nervousness about addressing someone whose advocacy work had become legendary among military families. I'm writing my college admission essay about growing up with classified parents. Would you have any advice? River smiled, remembering her own struggle with truthfulness versus institutional acceptance. Write your truth, she said simply. The essay that got me in trouble at Willow Creek eventually got me into Georgetown. Admissions committees value authenticity more than they value conventional narratives. But what if they don't believe me? Maria asked, echoing fears that River had carried throughout her high school years. Then they're not the right institution for you, River replied, her response reflecting wisdom earned through institutional battles and policy advocacy. You want to attend universities that value military family experiences, not institutions that question your integrity for being honest about your background. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Cooper, whose federal oversight role had evolved into broader military family advocacy, as River's initial case had revealed systematic problems requiring ongoing attention. His presence at academic events had become routine as policymakers recognized the importance of maintaining connection between theoretical study and practical implementation. River, Agent Cooper announced, the Secretary of Defense wants to discuss expanding the Military Family Advisory Committee. Your undergraduate research has impressed senior leadership. What kind of expansion? River asked, though her growing expertise in federal bureaucracy allowed her to anticipate the direction of such discussions. Regional advisory committees in areas with significant military populations, Agent Cooper explained. Your model of combining lived experience with academic credentials has proven effective for policy development. The opportunity to influence military family policy on a national scale felt both exciting and daunting. River was learning that success in advocacy work often led to increased responsibility for systemic change that affected thousands of families beyond her own. Patricia joined their conversation as the symposium audience dispersed, her maternal pride evident despite the professional setting. River, how do you feel about expanding your advisory role? Honored and terrified, River admitted, her honesty reflecting the family communication patterns that no longer required operational security editing. But if it helps other military kids avoid what I went through, then it's worth the additional responsibility. That evening, the Hayes family gathered for dinner at a Georgetown restaurant that had become their traditional meeting place during River's college years. The casual family meal represented normalcy that had taken years to achieve, though military habits of situational awareness and tactical conversation editing remained subtle constants in their interactions. "Tell us about Montana," River requested, eager for news from home that connected her Washington policy work to the community where her advocacy had begun. Willow Creek High School received national recognition for their military family support program, Master Chief Hayes reported with obvious satisfaction. "The curriculum you helped develop has become a model for rural schools across the country. What about the people?" River pressed, her curiosity focused on individual rather than institutional outcomes. "Mrs. Jimenez was promoted to District Curriculum Coordinator," Patricia replied. "Coach Guerrero received a federal commendation for military family advocacy. Sheriff Stone was elected to the County Commission on a platform of supporting military families." The news that her former allies had thrived professionally felt deeply satisfying to River, whose advocacy work had always emphasized community education rather than individual punishment for past mistakes. "What about Aiden?" River asked, referring to her former tormentor whose personal transformation had become as remarkable as any institutional reform. "Military Academy Prep School," Master Chief Hayes replied with grudging approval. "Apparently, understanding your courage inspired him to find his own. He's planning to apply for ROTC scholarships." The transformation of her primary antagonist into someone pursuing military service felt like poetic justice, though River had learned to appreciate redemption stories that demonstrated genuine character growth rather than convenient contrition. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, whose military family services work had brought him to Washington for policy coordination meetings that increasingly included River's input on implementation strategies. "River," Lieutenant Colonel Morrison addressed her with the professional respect that her policy expertise had earned among military leadership, "the Joint Chiefs want to discuss your recommendations for international military family support. NATO allies are requesting consultation on implementing similar programs." The international implications of her advocacy work felt overwhelming to someone who had begun with the simple goal of defending her family's truth against local institutional bias. But River was learning that individual courage often created changes that extended far beyond original intentions. "International consultation?" River asked, processing the scope of influence that her undergraduate research was generating. "Military families face similar challenges in allied nations," Lieutenant Colonel Morrison explained. "Your model of combining policy advocacy with community education has attracted attention from defense officials across NATO membership. The opportunity to influence military family policy internationally represented validation that extended beyond American institutional recognition." River's experience had revealed universal challenges that transcended national boundaries or specific military organizational structures. A month later, River found herself back in Willow Creek for the high school's annual Military Appreciation Ceremony, an event that had been transformed from routine recognition into comprehensive community education about military family dynamics. The same auditorium where she had been mocked for writing about her mother now hosted presentations about classification requirements and civilian support responsibilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Rebecca Walsh addressed the gathering, her leadership having replaced the institutional arrogance that had characterized her predecessor's administration. "Military families serve our community and our nation in ways that require sacrifices most of us cannot fully comprehend." River watched from the audience as current military students shared their experiences without fear of psychological evaluation or community skepticism. The transformation felt complete, yet fragile, requiring ongoing attention to maintain cultural changes that policy mandates had initiated. "River Hayes," Principal Walsh announced, "would you like to address the assembly?" River approached the podium where she had once faced hostile questioning about her family's truthfulness, noting how dramatically the context had shifted while the physical space remained unchanged. The audience that had once gathered to witness her humiliation now listened with respectful attention to her expertise. "Military families live in two worlds," River began, using the framework that had become central to her advocacy work. "The civilian world that expects normal family dynamics, and the military world that requires extraordinary sacrifices for national security. Community support means understanding those dual realities and helping military families navigate both successfully. After the ceremony, River visited Murphy's diner, where conversations about her family had once focused on speculation and mockery, but now centered on pride in their community's most famous advocate for military family rights. The transformation felt surreal but necessary, representing cultural change that complemented institutional reform. River called Mary Murphy from behind the counter. The usual? The familiarity felt comforting after years of being treated as either a curiosity or a case study. River had learned to appreciate communities that evolved their understanding rather than defending their previous misconceptions. As evening settled over Willow Creek, River walked the gravel road that led to the Hayes Ranch, noting how the Montana landscape remained constant while everything else had changed dramatically. The girl who had once faced institutional questioning about her sanity was now advising the Pentagon on military family policy and consulting with international allies on systematic reform. At the ranch, she found Patricia and Master Chief Hayes sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the Mission Mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded her why Montana would always represent home regardless of where her advocacy work took her. "How does it feel to be back?" Patricia asked as River settled into the chair that had been hers since childhood. "Like coming full circle," River replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose personal struggle had created systematic change benefiting thousands of other families. "But also like the beginning of something bigger." "Bigger how?" Master Chief Hayes inquired, his military experience recognizing ambition that extended beyond personal achievement into service to others. "International military family advocacy," River explained, her academic training providing framework for global policy influence that her individual experience had made possible. "Systematic reform that ensures no military child faces what I went through, regardless of which country their parents serve." The scope of River's vision represented growth that adversity had accelerated and education had refined. She was developing into exactly the kind of leader that democratic societies needed. Someone willing to transform personal pain into systematic improvement for others facing similar challenges. As darkness settled over Montana, River Hayes understood that her story was no longer just about a 14-year-old girl who defended her family's truth against institutional skepticism. It had become a testament to how individual courage could create changes that affected thousands of families, how personal adversity could catalyze institutional reform, and how young people could influence policy development when they combined lived experience with rigorous academic preparation. The truth, once revealed, had changed everything, but more importantly, it had shown that democracy worked best when citizens refused to accept institutional failures and fought for systematic changes that protected others from similar injustices. Tomorrow, River would return to Georgetown to continue her studies and her advocacy work. But tonight, she was simply a young woman who had learned that defending truth required courage, that courage could create change, and that change, properly implemented, could protect future generations from facing the same battles she had been forced to fight. The Hayes family ranch remained constant under Montana stars that had witnessed their struggle and would now observe their healing. But the world beyond those mountains had been fundamentally altered by a teenage girl who refused to let anyone dismiss her family's service as delusion, and who had transformed that refusal into systematic reform that would protect military families for generations to come. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.